civilizational factors in terms of opening up this new frontier of which we have been dreaming for many years now. Under the broader category of myths to form a world, the values that shape human civilization. Having the opportunity to speak with you once again this year on this shared endeavor of opening a new world, I come to speak to you not of matters of science and engineering. Those belong to those who have expertise in those fields. Instead, I want to speak about that which lies within the hearts of human beings and what stirs them to dream of such feats in the first place. A man is more than the sum of his particular thoughts and words and actions. He stands upon that which has come before him and acts upon that which comes from outside of him, in keeping not only with what he knows, but also that which he believes. So too the endeavors of societies and nations rest upon that which has come before, and that which they know, and that which they believe. The history of the deeds of mankind, both for good and ill, are but a concretized expression of that which they have believed. We are here on this occasion to witness history. Whether for good or for ill at this point, we don't know. We'll know in a little over a day and some hours. But we are here to make history as well. Oh, the papers and impassioned discussions may seem and be of little enduring significance, an ephemeral matter which is quickly forgotten. But they link us to what has been and what we hope will be. That's why we're here. The events of the past, the history of human exploration of this world, and beginning to venture out into the system, are part of us. For most of us, these deeds are not, in a significant way, our own deeds. And we envision deeds which may come long after we have departed this life. They are beyond the scope of our execution as well. But we see ourselves participating both in that which has come before us and that which will transpire in the future. Thus, we are here to make history. What type of history? There are three forms of history that are generally discussed. Secular history, as it's known, of the events of mankind, regardless of whether they are perceived to be mundane or epic in scope, which pertain to the individual, to the community, to a nation, an age, to the world. Sacred history is discussed as that history behind and above such a record of secular events. It is, for those who believe it, a record of higher purpose, divine intervention, if you will. One need not recognize nor acknowledge it for its power to remain. And then there is myth, which is in the realm of that which one believes and which comes then, therefore, into play in one's actions. Myth is the realm in which human beings perceive themselves to participate in that which transcends a mere record of events. Myth is the realm in which human beings perceive their participation in a grander scope of the story of our race, and wherein we find both direction and purpose for our thoughts, for our words, for our actions. From the dawn of the human race, the visions which have shaped civilizations throughout the ages have been expressed in terms of myth. And our age and our civilization are no different in this respect. The mythic vision is at work as often as we perceive ourselves to be part of that sweep of history which has come down from ages past, for the sake of both the present and the future. An example, just in passing. One can speak of a human being as consisting of certain elements, and that's scientifically true. On the other hand, one might speak of human beings being star stuff, as has been famously done. That is the language not of science, but of myth. It is true after a fashion, but it's intended to grasp the significance of man within the flow of creation itself. So thus, the distinction. The difficulty of speaking of myth is that it is so often now commonly used as a derogatory term, as if it were somehow a synonym for fiction. But myth does not, properly speaking, belong to the realm of fiction. Rather, as one scholar has put it, a myth was an event which in some sense had happened once, but which also happens all the time. Because of our strictly chronological view of history, we have no word for such an occurrence. But mythology is an art form which points beyond history to what is timeless in human existence, helping us to get beyond the chaotic flux of random events and glimpse the core of reality. Or as another has even more aptly described the purpose of myth in civilization, in the enjoyment of a great myth, we come nearest to expressing as a concrete which can otherwise be understood only as an abstraction. What flows into you from the myth is not truth, but reality. Truth is always about something, but reality is that about which truth is. And therefore, every myth becomes the father of innumerable truths on the abstract level. Myth is the mountain whence all the different streams arise, which become truths down here in the valley. In hac valle abstractionis. End of quote. But not all myths are true, and not all myths are edifying. In recent centuries, the myths which have moved the hearts of many have moved them in dark directions. Myths of race and evolution have led to slaughter in the name of the survival of the most vicious. Myths of class struggle have given birth to gulags. Malthusian myths have set men at each other's throats in a competition for survival. And myths of man's postmodern existence have not led to beings who are Nietzsche's supermen, but to the delusion that we are nothing but empty vessels, hijacked by memes for the propagation of non-rational competing streams of information. Attempting to create for ourselves a history without a purpose, in the shape of some of these modern myths, has been almost as destructive as the purposes to which the new myths are directing us. The myth of an aimless existence, a purposeless cosmic emptiness, inhabited by beings whose own sense of self-awareness is purported to be simply an illusion. This has led to the terror of history, a history which has come from nowhere and goes nowhere, tracing a pathless wasteland from blackness to blackness. As Mircea Eliade observed in the aftermath of the Second World War, and I quote, "For our purpose, only one question concerns us. How can the terror of history be tolerated from the viewpoint of historicism? Justification of a historical event by the simple fact that it happened that way will not go far toward freeing humanity from the terror that the event inspires. Be it understood that we are not here concerned with the problem of evil, which from whatever angle it is viewed, remains a philosophical and religious problem. We are concerned with the problem of history as history, of the evil that is bound up not with man's condition, but with his behavior toward others. And in our day, when historical pressure no longer allows any escape, how can man tolerate the catastrophes and horrors of history, from collective deportations and massacres to atomic bombings, if beyond them he can glimpse no sign, no transhistorical meaning, if they are only the blind play of economic, social, and political forces, or even worse, only the result of the liberties which a minority takes and exercises directly on the stage of universal history? We know how, in the past, humanity has been able to endure the sufferings we have enumerated. They were regarded as a punishment inflicted by God, the syndrome of the decline of an age, and so on. And it was possible to accept them precisely because they had metahistorical meaning. Because for the greater part of mankind, still clinging to the traditional viewpoint, history did not have and could not have value in itself. End of quote. Radically different visions, then, for the future of humanity are now in conflict. And the future of not only our own civilization, but the possibility of life spreading beyond the earth depend on the outcome of this conflict. The understanding which we have of the nature of humanity, the value of life, and the hopes which we have for the future shape the civilization we have today, and that which will shape future civilizations. It is not sufficient to bemoan the effects of the modern myths, which have darkened the minds of men in recent generations. We must eschew the myths themselves. In part, this is accomplished by means of our ethical principles. I treated that point several years ago in our conference at UCLA in discussing the choice between a Stoic ethic directed to service toward others with integrity in opposition to Epicureanism, which looks only to one's own gratification as a motivating principle. But much more than mere ethics are involved in our present dilemma. Ethical integrity to one's foundational principles implies that we have the right principles to begin with. We cannot ignore, in essence, the connection between our own inner space and outer space which draws us out from ourselves. A point which was driven home again to me recently during a visit to Chaco Canyon in northwestern New Mexico. Roughly 1,000 years ago, a civilization flourished in the deserts, built scores of buildings which testify to a relatively advanced level of societal organization and engineering skills. And at the very core of all of those labors, out in the midst of the desert, was a cosmological concern tied to astronomical observation. As Malville and Putnam note in their book, Prehistoric Astronomy in the Southwest, we can trace in broad strokes the likely development and flow of Anasazi astronomy during the 4 centuries from approximately AD 900 to AD 1300. Chaco Canyon was clearly the center of a major spurt of astronomical activity. There are moments in history when life accelerates. New ideas flash into people's minds and great works are created. As we encounter more examples of their knowledge of astronomy, 2 questions keep returning to tantalize and challenge us. How did the Anasazi make their astronomical observations, which were sometimes remarkably precise? And why did they appear to spend so much effort on astronomy? End quote. Why indeed? Their observations were not rooted in a practical necessity of survival. Indeed, much of the data which they carefully observed had nothing to do with crop cycles or the flow of the seasons. Their science was driven by mythical concerns which are now remote from us, save in perhaps something like those who would fashion a Tower of Babel. Their labors in stone were an attempt to ascend to the heavens and to make a name for themselves. The wordless books of stone which slowly decay in the wilderness tell us precious little of their motivations, save that they directed an entire civilization for a span of time almost as long as our own modern age. That which was expressed in the inner space of their mythology gave birth to an exploration of outer space. That which is myth links one to a vision of and participation in the past. And what a man makes of the past will tell you much regarding his vision for the future. The myths which have guided millions of human beings in recent decades have very little hope to offer mankind. Caught up in fantasies of the survival of the most vicious, or of class struggle, or of conflict over limited resources, such myths drive men apart and make them enemies of one another. We need to see man as he was first fashioned in the image of his Creator, though he has fallen from that image. Recognizing that man has become one who is Karawatu Sensei, who's curved in on himself, that is obsessed with his own petty desires and concerns, teaches us to turn away from such corruption, to seek the virtue which is outside of ourselves. Culture is inextricably linked to cultus. Veneration shapes a civilization, and the high values of a people are given form in and are formed by myth. Thus, in the words of Joseph Campbell, every functioning mythology is an organization of insights of this order, made known by way of works of visual art and verbal narrative, whether scriptural or oral, and applied to communal life by way of a calendar of symbolic rites, festivals and manners, social classifications, pedagogic initiations, and ceremonies of investiture, by virtue of which the community is itself mythologized to become metaphorical of transcendence, participating with its universe in eternity. Thus, Campbell says, a mythology is a control system, on the one hand framing its community to accord with an intuited order of nature, and on the other hand, by means of its symbolic pedagogic rites, conducting individuals through the ineluctable psychophysiological stages of transformation of the human lifetime: birth, childhood, adolescence, old age, the release of death, in unbroken accord simultaneously with the requirements of this world and the rapture of participation in the manner of being beyond time. So far, Campbell. Now, whether or not one wishes to conceive of a mythology as a control system, a term which implies a degree of contrivance, which is necessarily absent from ennobling myth, it certainly frames a community to an intuited or revealed order of nature. Our society's own founding declaration contains aspects which certainly give voice to an underlying intuited order of nature. Thus, for example, we have the Declaration, and I quote from our founding declaration, "We must go for our humanity. Human beings are more than merely another kind of animal. We are life's messenger. Alone of the creatures of the earth, we have the ability to continue the work of creation by bringing life to Mars and Mars to life. In doing so, we shall make a profound statement as to the precious worth of the human race and every member of it." End quote. We are not merely another kind of animal. We are life's messenger. In fact, we are stewards of the life of this terrestrial globe. If you wish to begin to look for those aspects which are needed to see ourselves aright, conceive of men once again as stewards of life, linked to a stewardship which was entrusted to humanity from its beginning, but which has often been abused and corrupted by the misdirection of human desire. A steward cares for something which is not his own, and he is answerable for the way in which he does or does not conduct his stewardship. Thus Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, "Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful." Now he wrote, of course, in terms especially of the stewardship of those entrusted with the proclamation of the word. But the principle which he applies in that circumstance certainly applies to all stewardship. How we use our knowledge, the goals which we have for our civilization. We are answerable for that vision. We are responsible for that which we hand on to those who come after us. The one who selfishly abuses that which has been entrusted to him is the one who hears, "What is this that I hear of you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward." We are to be stewards of life in a world which has little concern for life. We are to be stewards of life in a world which views the very increase of our own race as if it were somehow a burden on the world. We are to be stewards of life who contend with myths which would tear down man and make him nothing more than an animal. No, we do not get to dodge our responsibility. We desire to open a new world that it may live and flourish, and that the life which now fills our own world may one day enrich another. We desire to open a new world for the purpose which courses through every living being. We go for the future of ourselves and of our posterity and of life itself. Beholding that purpose from the first generation of man unto his last, we are called to render service to him who entrusted us with this calling. I thank you, and I'll take what questions you may have. And switch back to being able to see you. Yes, sir.
Yes, if life is found on Mars, what do you think the impact will be both on various religions and, in the larger context, on human mythology?
In certain respects, I think it will actually fulfill the expectations of many of those myths which already exist. In terms of the theological ramifications, this is an interesting question for me because I think we have a lot in this regard to learn from the churches both of the medieval and Renaissance era. Whether you're looking at Bishop Tempier in the 13th century, or whether you're looking, for example, at a theologian such as Johannes Kepler. The expectation was that each world had its own life. Kepler is the one I'm most familiar with just from my reading. And his own situation, he actually had speculated that each world would have life to be found in it, and it would be life suited to that world. And so the idea that this was somehow going to overturn the church or something, long before those speculations had become perceived to be a problem, they were accepted within the mainstream of the theology. So I think in a sense, the framework for the acceptance of such things is already there. In some cases, it's simply a matter of calling back to memory those things which were once believed and have since been neglected. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering in particular if a particular, maybe a fundamentalist religion would tend to say, well, this wasn't in the Bible originally, and if there's going to be some sort of a...
I think in that kind of a situation, asking about whether there'd be a fundamentalist concern, I think it depends on how one uses that term. Will there be some who will have a negative reaction to it? Well, yes. But certainly societies which were very traditional in terms of their theological values, obviously, as I was mentioning, had already accepted this as part of their worldview. I mean, in fact, it was actually due to the teachings of the church in France that the possibility of there being more than one world became philosophically permissible to express. Aristotle did not permit for there to be more than one world. If you actually read, it was a, I cannot remember the name of the author, Dumas, dealing with the topic of the condemnations of, I think it's 1232. The idea that God was incapable of creating more than one world was actually officially denounced. And so therefore the possibility of envisioning more than one world became permissible both within philosophy and within theology. Having been freed from the chains of Aristotle, we could begin to think in those terms. Aristotle also forbade thinking of a vacuum too, and that was overturned by the same bishop. So you owe modern science in no small respect to a condemnation decreed by the Roman Catholic Church. I say that to make you all as uncomfortable as possible. Do we have time for another question or two?
Just one more.
Okay.
Step aside.
Sure. I will step aside. There being no other questions, I thank you for your time. Oh, there was one. I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand. I'm sorry. Please.
If we were to encounter intelligent life in the universe, you think the theological implications of that would be different than just encountering, say, bacteria on Mars?
Absolutely. Certainly it would give us someone else with whom to discuss mythology. Intelligent life would be most welcome. But no, I think it is in one form or the other an opportunity to grow in our theological understanding, and so therefore is welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so that concludes the plenaries. The track sessions are about to begin.